A luxury EV stands in the center of a Beijing auto show. Polished, flashing, futuristic. A man opens the door, gets inside, presses the start button. Nothing. The screen lights up. Main chip missing. System cannot initiate. On the chassis, a label says, "Designed in China, powered by China." But 90% of the chips? From the United States. China spent over $4 trillion trying to break free from Western tech. But today, they still can't start a car without American permission. They say, "We've become a tech superpower." But why does every electric car still rely on chips from California? Why is Beijing silently lifting tariffs on US semiconductors while shouting anti-American slogans on TV? And if one chip can paralyze an entire industry, what else is hanging by a thread? Every modern electric vehicle runs on chips. Thousands of them. Brake systems, power management, LiDAR sensors, even the dashboard screen. One EV contains up to 3,000 chips. And most of those still come from the United States. China knows this. They've poured over $4.1 trillion into chip manufacturing in the last 10 years. They built 49 chip research centers. They passed laws, raised flags, gave speeches. They promised chip independence. But in 2025, China still cannot manufacture even 10% of the chips needed for its own electric vehicles. The real number is closer to 5%. And even those chips are mostly low-end. No nation can build smart cars without smart chips. And smart chips still come from Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Texas Instruments, Infineon, and ARM. Most of them based in the US or under US licensing power. So how does Beijing respond? They don't fight the tariff wall. They walk around it. Since early 2024, China has quietly removed tariffs on US chips used in electric vehicles. They say it's temporary, but the exemption now covers over 90% of all US automotive semiconductors. Publicly, they talk about decoupling from the West. But behind closed doors, they're making the chip gate wider. This isn't strategy. This is survival. And the illusion goes even deeper. When BYD announces a Chinese-made chip, it's often just a rebranded design, licensed from a US or European firm. There's no real independence, just packaging. And there's another problem. Even if China could design its own chips, they still need tools to make them. Those tools are dominated by three companies, ASML, Applied Materials, and Lam Research. Together, they control over 90% of global chip-making machines. Beijing knows this. That's why they're not fighting with bullets or boycotts. They're pleading for exceptions. They're asking Washington to let certain chipmakers keep exporting. Just a little longer. Enough to keep the EV factories moving. Enough to prevent a collapse. But the American response is changing. The US has started targeting exactly these choke points. Export restrictions, licensing reviews, and selective bans not on cars but on the chips that power them. That's the weak spot. That's the control switch. For years, China told the world it was building the future of clean mobility. Now, it can't even build a starter chip without American approval. That's not leadership. That's dependency wrapped in propaganda. For years, Chinese media repeated one line: "We've mastered the EV industry. The West is falling behind." It worked. Many believed it. Investors poured in. National pride surged. But inside the factories, a different story unfolded. At BYD, XPeng, and Li Auto, brands hailed as Tesla killers, engineers depend on imported chipsets for core functions. Not just processors, but also AI modules, radar control, power management, and connectivity units. In late 2024, a leaked procurement list from XPeng showed that 7 of their top 10 chip suppliers were American companies. The other 3 were licensed by American firms. Meanwhile, Li Auto's 2025 flagship SUV was delayed for 3 months. The reason? A shortage of US-made camera chips, the kind used for lane detection and object recognition. But these facts were never mentioned on China Central Television. Instead, state media highlighted domestic breakthroughs. often exaggerated or simply fake. One viral video showed a chip labeled 100% Chinese. Tech bloggers later traced it back to a Taiwanese factory using US ARM architecture and Japanese equipment. That's not independence. That's mislabeling. And it goes even further. When China says it's producing its own chips, most of the time it means assembly, not fabrication. The designs still come from abroad. The critical tools still come from Europe and the US. Even the software used to model chip behavior, made by American firms like Synopsys and Cadence. China doesn't control the IP. It doesn't control the equipment. It doesn't control the software. And without those three, it doesn't control the future. So why lie? Because the truth is politically dangerous. If citizens learn that the most advanced Chinese industries still kneel before American technology, the myth of national rise begins to crack. If companies admit that a single US restriction can paralyze production, global investors start to withdraw. And if officials admit that chip independence was just theater, they risk backlash not just from the public but from their own system. So they hide it, they redirect, they create noise. And in that noise, a nation continues to tell itself it's rising, while its smartest machines wait silently for permission to boot. This was never just about tariffs. It wasn't about cars. It wasn't about sales. It was always about architecture, about who gets to write the rules for the next industrial era. The US never tried to stop China from making electric vehicles. They did something smarter. They targeted the critical nodes. Instead of banning exports, they licensed dependency. Let China build fast while quietly controlling the oxygen, chips, software, design tools. Then came the lockdown, the Chips and Science Act, the Entity List, the Foreign Direct Product Rule. One by one, America began turning off the switches. NVIDIA was told to restrict advanced chip exports. ASML was pressured to limit extreme ultraviolet EUV machines. EDA software firms were barred from licensing new versions to China. None of this was loud. No tanks, no speeches, just a silent siege. A siege of brains, code, and silicon. And the target? Not Huawei, not TikTok. The real target was China's dream of tech self-reliance. That's why electric vehicles matter. EVs are not just cars. They are computers on wheels. Whoever controls the chips inside them controls the vehicle. And whoever controls the vehicle shapes the data, the network, the market, the military spin-offs. Beijing saw the danger. Too late. In response, China rushed to subsidize local chipmakers. They built industrial parks, funded national champions, forced state companies to buy Chinese. But it didn't change the foundation, because global chip logic doesn't run on subsidies. It runs on patents, standards, and alliances. And the US played that game perfectly. They created the Chip 4 Alliance, a quiet tech NATO between the US, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. They signed exclusive licensing pacts with software providers. They pushed Mexico, Vietnam, and India to take over assembly lines that once lived in Shenzhen. It's not just about cutting off China. It's about building a new global route where China isn't needed. And here's the twist. China can't strike back. If they ban chip exports to the West, nothing changes. If they retaliate against US firms, supply chains reroute. If they block foreign investment, capital dries up. Any move they make hurts them first. That's not a trade war. That's checkmate. Trump understood this. That's why he never tried to destroy Chinese EVs directly. He let them grow, let them overexpand, let them dream. Then he cut off the nerve system. And now, a nation full of smart cars. No chips, no control, no options, just silence on the dashboard and panic behind the wheel. Then another, then hundreds. EV assembly lines across China paused production in early 2025. No official statement, no protest, just silence and backlog. The missing pieces, power chips from Texas, camera modules from Arizona, AI drivers from California. When US sanctions deepened, import licenses froze. Customs clearance stalled. Prices doubled. Deliveries failed. And just like that, output plummeted by 43% across 5 major factories in Jiangsu and Guangdong. BYD canceled its global rollout of the 2025 Han Max model. Li Auto postponed its EV truck series. Xpeng cut 1,800 workers without warning. The headlines vanished quickly, but on factory floors the lights didn't come back on. In Shenzhen, hundreds of technicians walked out of a halted chip lab. No project to finish. No salary this month. No guarantees for the next. I studied 7 years in semiconductor engineering. One man wrote on Weibo, "My job disappeared overnight. They told me to retrain in solar panel installation." The post was deleted within 2 hours. In Changsha, a supplier of EV battery casings locked its gates. The manager disappeared. Workers stood outside in the rain for days. Some left behind sleeping bags at the entrance. They didn't protest. They waited for news that never came. In Guiyang, a young woman recorded herself emptying her locker at a smart car R&D hub. The voice was calm. Her words were careful. "We were told we're being restructured. Our team of 42 people is now 6. They said we should seek external growth opportunities. But there are none." The video spread and was gone. Then came the second wave. The parts suppliers collapsed. Makers of screws, wires, plastic frames, small businesses built on the back of the EV boom, found no buyers. Inventories piled up. Invoices went unpaid. Credit lines dried up. In just 3 months, over 12,000 auto-adjacent firms filed for bankruptcy. Not because demand disappeared, but because one country lost access to one set of chips. Then came the third wave. The local governments panicked. Tax revenue fell. Unemployment payouts surged. Social insurance systems buckled. To cover the gap, officials quietly diverted funds from school budgets, road repair programs, and hospital upgrades. In Yunnan, state subsidies for EV purchases were frozen without notice. In Inner Mongolia, job retraining programs for laid-off workers were canceled due to budget realignment. The message was clear. The industry failed. You're on your own. Then came the fourth wave. Social pressure fractured. Parents pulled children out of tutoring centers. Young couples postponed weddings. Women delayed pregnancies. Elderly parents canceled health checkups to save money. And online, the narrative collapsed. People began asking, if we're so strong, why do we beg for chips from our enemy? If we make the best cars, why do they stop working without US parts? If we lead the future, why can't we drive it? The censors moved fast. Thousands of posts deleted, accounts suspended, search terms blocked. But the silence was no longer obedience. It was disappointment. Then came the fifth wave, the geopolitical reset. Foreign automakers accelerated their exits. Volkswagen sold its last EV factory stake in Anhui. Toyota moved its innovation hub to Bangkok. Ford cut its China production in half. Meanwhile, Mexico, Vietnam, and India picked up the slack. American firms, Japanese giants, and European startups funneled investment elsewhere. Not out of ideology, but out of necessity. Why build in a country that can't guarantee chip supply? In less than a year, China went from EV exporter to assembly risk. A nation of engineers, now reduced to resellers. A generation of coders, now writing resumes. A trillion-dollar industry, waiting in line for permission to reboot. The chain reaction didn't just hit economics. It hit identity. This was the sector Beijing called the crown jewel. The one that would surpass the West. The one that defined the new China. And now, EV dreams sit idle. Chip labs go dark. Hope reroutes elsewhere. At the beginning, we saw a silent car. It looked advanced. It looked powerful. It just couldn't start. That silence wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a message, a mirror. Because what else in China today looks strong, moves fast, shines bright, but stops the moment the outside world turns away. Factories, jobs, growth, all dependent on parts not made at home. Beijing said, "We won't kneel." But in 2025, they quietly lifted tariffs on the very chips they once swore to replace. No headlines, no speeches, just a quiet surrender, masked as policy adjustment. Now, as smart cars sit idle in warehouses, as assembly lines power down, as a trillion-dollar industry waits in limbo, one question echoes louder than any slogan. What does it mean to rise if you can't even start?